The sky broke before my world did. It was not a storm of rain and thunder I had known since birth, but a storm of fire and screaming metal that tore the celestial tapestry above my fields. The sun was blotted out by a wound in the heavens, a falling star that did not wish upon its descent but commanded it, dragging with it a sound that was the universe itself being rent asunder. I stood there, rooted to the soil that had defined my existence, and watched the very concept of above come to an end. It was the death of a sky, the funeral pyre of a predictable world. The shock wave that threw me from my feet was not of air, but of destiny. I walked toward the crater, toward the jagged, smoking artifact that had violated my land. The air was thick with ozone and the scent of something utterly alien, a perfume of burnt starlight and energies I had no name for. This was not a vessel that had crashed. It was a shard of a higher reality that had been violently embedded into mine. And from its core, she emerged. Not carried, not crawling, but striding forth from the ruin as if it were a throne room. Her armor was the color of a midnight nebula, shattered and scarred, yet it could not contain the sovereignty that radiated from her. Her eyes were not merely looking at the landscape, they were assessing its worth, its potential, its very right to exist beneath her gaze. There were no words. Language was a tool for equals, and we were not that. She looked at me, and in that instant, I was known. She saw the generations of my line, the strength in my bones earned from a lifetime of labor, the unwavering connection I had to the earth I stood upon. She saw a foundation, and I, in turn, saw not a refugee but a conqueror in need of a foothold. Her thoughts poured into mine not as a voice, but as a cascade of pure meaning. She showed me dying galaxies, fleets of warships like locusts, and a throne, empty and waiting. She offered no plea, no negotiation. It was a statement of fact, a transaction of cosmic scale. My world, my genetic anchor, my absolute loyalty, in exchange for a dynasty that would span 1,000 suns. To accept was to burn away the man I was, to have my soul reforged into a crown. To refuse was to remain dirt. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an awakening. I knelt, and the earth I had once served seemed to fall away beneath me. The pact was sealed not with a handshake, but with a touch. Her armored gauntlet, cool as the void between worlds, rested upon my brow as I knelt in the soil of my ancestors. And then, the universe ignited behind my eyes. It was not a gentle dawning. It was the pain of 1,000 suns being born in the hollow of my skull. My connection to the earth, once my source of strength, became an anchor dragging me into an abyss of sensation. My simple human mind, built to comprehend the turning of seasons and the weight of a harvest, was violently plugged into the mainframe of creation. The first lesson of my new existence was this: reality is a scream, and for my entire life I had been blissfully deaf. The upgrade, she called it, a simple sterile term for the absolute demolition of a soul. My body convulsed, no longer my own. My blood felt as if it were boiling and freezing in alternating heartbeats, a civil war raging in my veins. The nanites, the sentient machines she had injected with that single touch, began their sacred, brutal work. They were architects and executioners, mapping my genetic code and finding it worthy. A foundation of resilient, terrestrial clay upon which a star-forged palace could be built. But first, the old structure had to be raised. I felt my DNA being unspooled, each strand held up to a new light, judged, and then rewritten. The memories of my father, the feeling of the sun on my face, the scent of rain on dry earth, all were drowned in a tidal wave of raw data. I was no longer a man. I was a biological battlefield. This was the madness. My senses, once my most trusted guides, became my tormentors. My hearing expanded until I could perceive the groan of the planet's tectonic plates shifting miles below, the frantic scrabbling of insects in their burrows, the whisper of stellar winds against the magnetosphere. It was a cacophony that threatened to tear my consciousness apart. My vision shattered into 1,000 spectrums. I could see the heat rising from the soil, the ultraviolet signature of flowers, the faint shimmering aura of life force around every living thing. To look at a tree was to see not just bark and leaves, but the intricate dance of photosynthesis, the slow, patient flow of water from root to branch. To look at my own hands was to see a maelstrom of cellular division and decay. I was a god drowning in his own omniscience. I writhed in the dirt, a prisoner in my own body, my throat raw from screams that had no sound. I begged for the silence of ignorance, for the comfortable blindness of my past. Through this inferno, she was my only constant. She did not offer comfort. Comfort was a luxury for the weak, for those not destined to rule. Instead, she offered structure. Her mind became a fortress in the storm of my own, a single, pure note of order in the pandemonium. She forced her will into the chaos, not to quell it, but to teach me how to command it. Focus. Her thoughts were not words, but immense, conceptual pressures. That sound is your planet's heart. Listen to its rhythm. Do not be broken by it. Command it to be your song. That light is the language of energy. Read it. Do not be blinded by it. Force it to reveal its secrets. I fought against her, my tattered human ego thrashing like a cornered animal. Who was she to remake me? But even as I resisted, a deeper part of me, the part that had knelt in the first place, reached for the discipline she offered. I began to learn. It was the hardest labor I had ever known, harder than a lifetime of plowing unyielding fields. I learned to build dams in the rivers of my own perception. I learned to take the torrent of sensory data and channel it, to will it into coherent thought. I started with the smallest things. I focused on a single stone, forcing myself to see it only as a stone, pushing back the overwhelming flood of its geological history, its molecular structure, its gravitational relationship with the moon. For a full day, I wrestled my own mind for control of a single pebble. And when I finally succeeded, when I could perceive it as I once had, yet know that all the other layers of information were there, waiting at my command, it was a victory greater than any king had ever known. With control came the second stage of the upgrade, the infusion of knowledge. My mind, now a vessel capable of holding the sea, was flooded. She poured millennia of her people's history into me. Star charts bloomed in my memory, not as flat maps but as living three-dimensional tapestries of gravity wells and cosmic highways. I learned the physics of starships, the mathematics of orbital bombardment, the philosophies of 100 forgotten empires. I absorbed the brutal art of war, not as a soldier learns it, with drills and discipline, but as a predator is born with it, an innate, terrifying instinct. I could look at a mountain range and instantly see 1,000 defensive fortifications, calculate lines of fire, and predict troop movements. I could gaze at the clouds and understand the subtle atmospheric pressures that would affect the trajectory of a plasma bolt fired from orbit. This deluge of strategic and scientific lore was a different kind of pain. It hollowed out my identity. The farmer I had been was now a ghost, a phantom limb. His concerns, the rain, the harvest, the community were so infinitesimally small, so tragically simple, that the memory of him brought a new kind of agony, an immense, soul-crushing loneliness. I was becoming a sovereign entity, and sovereignty is an island. I saw her, my queen, and for the first time, I understood the eternal solitude in her eyes. She was not just a warrior or a ruler. She was the last repository of a dying star's legacy, and she had chosen me to be the foundation of a new one. The burden she carried would now be mine as well. This was not a gift of power. It was a sentence of responsibility. While my mind was being reforged in this celestial fire, my body was keeping pace. The pain was exquisite. I felt my bones densifying, my marrow learning to produce blood richer and more efficient. My muscles tore themselves apart and rewove into fibers of impossible strength and speed. My skin became a shield, my eyes a pair of advanced optical sensors. I would wake from feverish trances to find myself taller, broader, the geometry of my own face subtly altered, sharpened, honed into the visage of a king. The process was meant to take years, a gradual acclimatization. But her enemies were coming. The ones who had shattered her fleet and left her for dead were hunting her. And this world, my world, was now the prize and the target. The upgrade had to be accelerated, the crucible intensified. She pushed me to the absolute limit of biological and psychological endurance. She would strand me in the frozen peaks of the highest mountains with no protection, forcing my new biology to adapt to the cold, to draw energy directly from the thin atmosphere. She would submerge me in the deepest parts of the ocean, compelling my lungs to learn to extract oxygen from the water itself. These were not trials to build character. They were brutal, pass-or-die calibrations of the weapon I was becoming. During one, as I lay at the bottom of a crushing trench, the water a black icy press, my body failing, I felt my consciousness begin to fray. The madness threatened to return. I felt the immense, indifferent weight of the water above, and for a moment, I welcomed the oblivion it promised. And then I felt her, not her physical presence, but her mind, a lighthouse of pure will cutting through my despair from the surface miles above. They took my home from me, she projected, her thought a spear of cold fire. They shattered my fleet, murdered my people, and cast me into this darkness. I did not choose you for your ability to die. I chose you for your capacity to endure. Their fleets will burn skies, but we will build a dynasty from their ashes. Now, stand up. That thought, that singular command, was more potent than any physical aid. It was the will of a queen, and it demanded a king to answer. I felt something shift within me. The farmer's instinct to yield, to bend to the will of nature, finally died. In its place, something harder, something forged and sharp, rose up. My body responded not to a conscious command but to this new, implacable will. My cells ignited with a fresh wave of energy. My lungs, which had been failing, suddenly and violently adapted. I took a breath. A ragged, searing breath of pure, oxygenated water. My eyes, which had been squeezed shut against the pressure, opened and pierced the abyssal gloom. The crushing weight of the ocean was no longer a burden. It was a pressure I could meet and master. I did not just stand. I rose through the water, ascending from the abyss not as a survivor, but as a master of a new domain. When I breached the surface, the sun felt different. It was no longer a distant, benevolent star. It was a fusion reaction whose output I could calculate, whose light I could parse into its component photons. She stood on the shore, unmoving, her expression unreadable. But I could see past her face now. I could see the faint tracings of her thoughts, the tactical assessments, the constant, simmering vigilance. I walked out of the water, my body no longer just a shell of flesh but a calibrated weapon system. The man who had been a farmer was a forgotten fossil, buried under layers of pain, knowledge, and sheer, indomitable will. I was no longer of the earth. I was of the earth and stars combined. I had been dragged through the furnace of my own mind, torn apart and reassembled. I had not been given power. I had survived its birth. I looked at her, my queen, and for the first time, I saw not a savior or a master, but an equal, my equal. And in her eyes I saw the reflection of a king. The madness was gone, reforged into a terrible, lucid clarity. My ultimate upgrade was complete. We stood on that shore, two sovereigns born of a single cataclysm. The pact was fulfilled, the madness mastered, the weapon forged. In her eyes I no longer saw a mentor, but the other half of a covenant. She had needed a foundation. I had become a fortress. She had sought a king. I had ascended. There was no need for words to pass between us. Our minds, now resonant on the same cosmic frequency, understood the silent proclamation. The time for creation was over. The time for war had come. The sky screamed its ascent. They did not arrive with the chaotic fury of a falling star, as she had. They came with the cold, arrogant geometry of a conquering fleet, punching through the atmosphere in perfect, brutalist formations. A fleet of daggers aimed at the heart of my world. When I was a farmer, the sight would have shattered my soul. Now, I simply looked up and read. I saw the thrumming energy signatures of their shield capacitors, the minute fluctuations in their engine outputs, the precise vectors of their descent. It was not a terrifying spectacle. It was an equation laid bare before me, and I could already see the solution. My mind, a nexus of terrestrial instinct and celestial knowledge, processed it all. They saw a primitive world to be sterilized. I saw a graveyard of their own design. The queen moved to my side, her mind a projection of pure tactical will. Their main host seeks the energy signature of my vessel. They will deploy ground forces to secure it, believing me to be wounded and cornered. They are correct, I projected back, my thought not an answer but a continuation of her own. She is wounded, and she is cornered, but you are not her. We did not build defenses. Defenses are monuments to fear. We prepared a harvest. This planet, every mountain, every canyon, every abyssal trench I had been forced to master, was now a tooth in a trap of my making. They believed they were invading a world. They were, in fact, stepping into an extension of my own body, my own will. I used my connection to the planet's electromagnetic field, a sense I had once found torturous, to create ghost signals, drawing their primary assault force into the labyrinthine canyons of the Great Divide. I seeded the upper atmosphere with metallic dust from the crater's impact, a simple farmer's trick of dispersal that would play havoc with their advanced targeting systems, turning their surgical strikes into blind rampages. I looked upon their descending armies, their legions of chrome-plated soldiers marching in perfect synchronicity, and in my mind, I had already chosen where their monuments of failure would fall. This was the burden of my new perception, to see the end before the beginning, to know the outcome of a battle not through hope, but through cold, immutable calculation. There was a profound loneliness in it, a terrible certainty that separated me from the raw chance of life I had once known. When the first shots were fired, I felt them not as distant explosions, but as a discordant note in the symphony of my world. From the command nexus we had established within the wreckage of her ship, I became the battle. My consciousness expanded, flowing across the planet. I was the rockslide I triggered with a focused seismic pulse, burying a vanguard in 1,000,000 tons of stone. I was the flash flood I redirected through a desert ravine, washing their armored divisions away like children's toys. I was the hurricane whose path I subtly altered, slamming its eye directly into their primary atmospheric command post. The Queen orchestrated the orbital dance, using the shell of her crippled vessel as a lure, her mind a blade of light, parrying and countering the fleet above. But the ground, the very soil they sought to conquer, was mine, and it hated them. The turning point came when their commander, a being of immense psionic and physical power, realized he was not fighting a desperate refugee. He was fighting the planet itself. In a rage of wounded pride, he descended personally, his flagship burning a hole through the sky to land directly before our position. He strode from the ramp, a giant in obsidian armor, his mind a battering ram of pure malice. He expected to crush a broken queen and her consort. He found me waiting for him. I walked out to meet him on the blackened earth. The air crackled between us. His psychic assault came first, a wave of terror, despair, and domination meant to collapse the minds of lesser beings. I met it not with a shield, but with an abyss. I simply opened my mind to him, showing him the crucible I had endured. I showed him the scream of reality, the pain of a soul being unmade and remade, the silent, crushing weight of omniscience. I showed him the madness I had conquered. He reeled back, his psychic blow swallowed by a void far more terrifying than any he could conjure. For an instant, I saw in his mind not a conqueror, but a frightened child, horrified by the existence of a power he could not comprehend. Then came the physical. He moved with a speed that should have been impossible, a blur of motion and violence. But my senses were no longer bound by the speed of nerve endings. I saw his intention before his muscles tensed. I tracked the arc of his energy blade as a series of static images. His attack, for all its power, was happening in slow motion. I did not simply dodge. I stepped through the web of his assault, my movements economical, absolute. My body, remade by the nanites and honed by the planet's harshest crucibles, was a thing of perfect efficiency. I caught his wrist, the impact echoing like a thunderclap. His surprise was palpable, a sharp spike of disbelief in the psychic ether. He was stronger, but strength without purpose is just weight. My purpose was the genesis of a dynasty. His was mere conquest. The end was not a struggle, it was a pronouncement. I broke his blade. I broke his line. I broke him. As he fell, the collective will of his army shattered. A body cannot fight when its head has been severed. Across the planet, the fighting faltered and then ceased. The silence that descended was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of absolute victory, the silence of conquered stars. I looked up at the sky, at the now leaderless fleet, and simply projected a single thought to them: leave. And they fled, scrambling over each other to escape a world that had grown teeth. I stood there for a long time, the sole living thing on a plain of wreckage and death. The exultation of victory did not come. In its place was a quiet, immense gravity. I had not just defended my home, I had claimed it. I had proven my sovereignty not just to an enemy, but to the universe itself, and to myself. I turned and walked back to the ship, back to my queen. Our child, the first of our line, would be born on a world that knew no master but its father. Our genetic destiny was now manifest. The farmer was dead. The king had concluded his first harvest. From the ashes of their invasion, we built our capital, a city of silent crystalline towers that drank the starlight. My queen stood beside me on the highest spire, her hand resting on a belly that now held the future. Below us, our new world hummed with purpose, remade in our image.